Hello everyone and welcome back to another tutorial video. In today's video we're going to look at an assortment of poses for your anime characters. This will be pretty beginner friendly and hopefully pretty easy to follow along with. My goal in this one is not necessarily to get into the nitty gritty of the anatomy, but more so thinking about the posing and most importantly the framing of these characters. My hope is that if you're learning how to draw, or you want to get into making fan art or drawing even your own characters and poses and essentially making portraits, you need to know how to frame them. You want to look into having some fun poses to put them in so they're not just flat sitting there staring at you straight on. So that's the purpose of this video. Posing and showing you framing so you can make nice portraits of the characters that you're trying to draw. So for starters, we'll go ahead and get perspective out of the way. This can be really helpful when you're trying to draw your character and to make a nice looking portrait, because giving them either high or low perspective, whatever it may be, can make it look more dynamic than it really is. So even if they're in a rather simple pose, if you have good perspective and you manipulate that, you can make the character look a lot more interesting than if they're just sitting there straight head on. Even if they're in like a fun pose, maybe they're sitting there doing whatever, doesn't matter. If you throw in a little perspective, it can immediately make the picture look a little more dynamic. So to start with a high perspective, I like to start with a sort of V shape like this, because we know everything at the top of the page is closer to us than everything at the bottom. So having a little V shape like this will kind of help taper off the overall figure of our character. Then we can go ahead and draw a very simple, pretty large head. We don't want to fill the entire space up there. Of course, we can kind of resize and mess with it if we have to, but in this particular position here, and with the framing of this picture, the head and the face is sort of the loudest part of the picture. So we want the head to be visible. We want it to be moderately large, like so. Next, we can go ahead and add a simple shape for the torso of our character. And again, in the construction lines, it's okay if it looks a little bit odd or a little bit goofy. It's going to be edited a ton for the finished piece. It's just for now, we need little placeholders. So if you're doing this digitally like me, I really recommend layering everything. So you have the head on its own layer, then have this torso on its own layer. So that way you can very easily just kind of stack them. Because ultimately, that's the name of the game. We want to take the big pieces like the head, like the torso, and then later the hips, and we're just stacking them on top of each other. Then we can figure out how to connect them afterwards. But for now, just have your little torso section, and you can move it around as needed so that it looks like it is stacked beneath the head, like so. Now we can go ahead and draw in our hip shape. So again, just like in the previous step, on its own separate layer, I have it stacked beneath the torso piece. And then I went ahead right away and I just connected the sort of stomach area. And I like doing that with just one line, just kind of scratch it in like so, nice and sharp, one and done. And we can figure out the rest as we get into the next steps and add in our arms and things like that. And again, make sure that you're following along with these little lines here and you're keeping everything just barely tapering away. Because you can notice that the space between the outer sort of guidelines, the little V, and the character itself doesn't necessarily change, right? Like the widest portion of the hip over here on the right is about as far away as where the widest portion of our torso will be. And my shoulder circle got a little bit loose, so it's kind of thicker than it needs to be. But it's essentially the same space. So we know if we're following that and we're keeping the space between our character and the guidelines, if we keep that consistent, we'll have a nice smooth taper without necessarily making anatomically the hips smaller than they should be, or anatomically making the head too big, whatever it might be. We can just nicely taper it off and it should look good in the finished product. Next, you can add in the thighs. And for this one, I like to keep the thigh on the backmost portion, kind of come up past the little hip bump a little bit, just because from this angle, we're kind of above and to the side, so we would see a little tiny bit of the glute poking out. Not a ton, but we'd see a little bit of it, so bring it up instead of hanging it right down from the side of the hip. Just have it go up behind that hip shape just a little tiny bit. And then you can also add in some of the neck detail lines up at the top of the character. Now go ahead and tuck your character's arms behind her head like so. Keep in mind that the shoulder is going to be nice and rounded since it's pulling the arms up. And also try to keep your elbows just under the top of the head. It's okay if they're even at worst, but we want them just below so that way this sort of bicep and tricep portion of the arm isn't too long. Then we can add some boobs off the front like so. And there you go. As long as you follow the guidelines that we set out, you should have a character that just slowly tapers off down at the bottom to nail this perspective. And just keep in mind, you especially if you're doing this digitally, it's pretty easy to keep things on separate layers. So keep your head on its own layer, have your torso and even the arms on their own layer, and then go ahead and have the hips, stomach, and thighs on their own layer. So that way you can kind of mess around and shift them around more easily. So that way you can have them nice and stacked on top of each other to sort of nail the perspective that we're kind of up high looking down at our character. Now we will look at a low perspective for our character. So similar to the last one, you kind of want to have a V shape for the outermost lines. This one's a little less exaggerated, but you can exaggerate it more if you want to have a more aggressive perspective, or you can do what I did where it's just slightly angled so that way the perspective won't be as extreme in this one. But I also went ahead and added a center line for this one. Since our character is going to be looking straight at us, it'll be a lot easier to sort of balance and get the symmetry right. That's the important part here. So since she's looking straight at us, add a center line. So like in all my tutorials, I like mapping out the hips, head, and the ribs for our characters. Then we can balance everything off of those. However, for this one, because the hips are the closest of those major structures to us, we'll go ahead and draw that first. So we'll draw that sort of typical hip shape that we're used to. However, this time we want to actually capture the sort of flat underbelly of this sort of hip girdle. So go ahead and draw in this shape like so, and include a little flat piece here just to show that we're kind of looking up at the character, which means we're going to see some of the flat portion of our hip. Now go ahead and draw your torso for your character and have it stacked just behind our hips. And again, notice how using these guidelines out on the edges, the space between the widest portions of my torso and the widest portions of my hips are pretty much the exact same. And again, this is important because if you're going in it blind and you're just trying to, oh, I'll just make this smaller so it looks like it's further away, well, that might be okay if you're going for a very extreme perspective angle, which is pretty difficult to do and make it look right. But the reason why we want it to be a nice, gentle flow and to have consistent guidelines here is because we don't want it to look like our chest and our head just magically are way smaller than they ought to be. So from this angle, it's not like her head is all of a sudden 27 feet away from us, okay? This is like a normal size anime girl, so she's probably like around 5'5", okay? So she's not super ultra tall. So we just want to make sure we have a gentle perspective tapering off towards the top and keep our character balanced off of that. And for me, I typically keep my hips in line with the shoulder circles that I draw in. So having these guidelines is nice because I know that 9 times out of 10, I want my shoulder and my hip to have the same space between them and my guideline. Now add a simple head and stack it just behind the torso. Now we'll go ahead and add in the thighs for our character. And pretty much for these ones, we want to keep in mind that, again, the thighs are very close to us. And we are actually pretty close to the knees as well, which means the knee joint itself is going to be a lot thicker than what we're used to drawing. So we still want to capture how the thigh is at its thickest, just kind of below the hips, and then it tapers down towards the knee. But because the knee joint is bigger, because it's closer to our perspective, that taper will be a lot more gradual. So keep the thighs pretty thick all the way through, and you're going to catch a little bit of the glutes, and you're going to catch a little bit of a bump there in between. We're not going to worry about that because YouTube will remove my channel if so. Just for now, for the sake of having it anatomically correct, there's a little bump there, but don't worry about it. Just keep some space in between the thighs and you'll be good to go. Next, we will add in the classic anime girl hand pose. I don't know why they're all posed like this, to be honest, but 9 times out of 10, if you're looking at fan art accounts or you're just going around doing your thing, this is just a very common hand pose and arm pose for your character. Maybe she's surprised to see us hanging out. If you've watched my boob tutorial, then you'll kind of already know how to structure and shape the boobs from a low perspective, but in case you haven't, the most important thing to keep in mind is the ribs are hard, they're solid, the boob is not. So from this angle, we're going to see that the boobs sort of get warped by the ribs that they're resting on. So have a little bit of a concave line there at their base, and bring them up nice and high over our collarbone, just because, again, they stick out from the ribs, so they're going to hide the collarbone from this angle. Take the time to make any necessary corrections and make sure that your ribs and your head are stacked the way that you want, and then you can go ahead and add in your line art to finish, and it should look something like this when you are done. Now we'll start looking at some poses from a more neutral perspective. For this first one, we'll have our character bending over slightly towards us. So I like to start, when she's looking straight on to us, we want to have a straight up and down center line here so we can kind of help balance our character on either side of it and really nail the symmetry. So add your starting center line and then add a simple head right at the top. Now we want to go ahead and add in our torso shape, kind of like this. From this angle, the traps of our characters and the collarbone kind of make a diamond shape when they connect to the shoulder circles. So kind of draw in a little bit of a diamond there between those, and then we just want to bring the front portion of this rib cage out off of that just a little bit. So that's essentially what's going on there. The easy shapes to remember is just draw your circle for the shoulders, connect it with a little diamond shape for the traps and collarbone, and then add a little bit of space off the collarbone for the actual hard part of the rib cage where our boobs will hang off of. Next, we can put in a simple hip shape behind our character, and I did go ahead and connect just a little bit with the stomach area here. This is mostly going to be hidden by the chest, so it doesn't have to be perfect. But remember, our character's bent towards us a little bit, so it's not like her hips are going to be completely bent towards us as well. They'll be bent a little bit, but that's why they're not going to be like super flattened and cut off or anything, and there's not a whole lot of them angled towards us. So you still want to keep that traditional hip bump on either side, and that part's not going to get super exaggerated. Just keep in mind, you don't want the hips just straight up and down, because then it looks like she's doing just like a random hinge towards us, but she actually wants to be bending a little bit. So the visual of the hip won't be much different than if she was standing up. Now we can add our simple thighs like so, and then we'll cover a large portion of that sort of hinging area with the chest like this. Now, obviously, if you have a smaller chested character, then you can't hide quite as much of what's going on behind them, but sometimes for the sake of keeping it simple, it can be nice to just use the boobs to hide some of the more technical parts of the art to get correct. But I showed you what you had to do, so that way if you're drawing a smaller chested character, you still can draw that hinge and you can still draw the stomach folds and stuff like that. But for this character, we're going to hide a lot of that with the chest like so. We'll give our anime waifu an angry stance for this one, so just go ahead and add her hands up on her hips like so. Take the time to make any little corrections and balances and symmetrical changes to your construction lines, and then you can go over it with your hard lines to finish your character, and they should look something like this. Now we'll take a look at another very common pose in the anime and manga space with our kneeling waifu. We want to start with a pretty simple head, but this time tilt it off to the side just a little bit. Then we'll map out the structure of our knees and shins. So you want to have some nice high, large circles that we can kind of draw our knee off of, and then have a slight V shape to the shin portion. We don't want them just right up next to each other. We want there to be a little bit of space. So have them do that since the knees are getting pushed together and then the feet are sticking out just slightly to help our character keep balance. Now we can draw our knees and our calves like so. Then we want to draw in our thick thighs and glutes. For the portion in between them, we don't want a whole lot of that thigh visible, just a little bit. So just have a little small section there where the thigh kind of curves around and connects to the glutes down there. But keep the glutes thick, keep the thighs thick, just because when our character is kneeled like this, the extra mass of the thigh is actually getting pushed on by the much firmer calf muscle and the firmer shin, stuff like that. So they're really going to spill out and over. So you still want to have visually thick thighs for this pose. Then we want to add a small torso behind the knees, because again, the majority of our torso is being hidden by the knees. So we don't want a super big one here, just to nail the perspective of this pose. Then we can add our arms and boobs like so. I just have one of her arms coming up, kind of pulling her hair back, so she's trying to get a good look at us, while the other is just tucked under her stomach, just kind of supporting her chest. So you can draw it like this, and you should be good to go. Make any necessary adjustments and get the balance of your character and the symmetry down. And then once you are done doing that, you can go ahead, trace over your lines with your hard lines to finish your character like so. Next, we'll go ahead and draw a seated character. So this pose is going to be a little bit tricky when you're just first starting out, just because it's pretty hard to nail the sort of spine line, which is what I've got drawn here, this sort of curved shape. So really all you need to do for right now is draw a shoulder and then just try to mimic this line I have here. You want it kind of coming in, following your back of your character, and then have it poke out for the lower back where she's nice and curvy, and then it wraps around into the glute like so. This line is going to change a lot and be unrecognizable when we're finished. So it doesn't need to be perfect. Just try to mimic this shape here. This is just a guideline, and we're going to balance stuff off of it, and we'll change it as we go. Next, we can draw a slightly flattened rib cage shape like so, but include a little point on it in the back for the shoulder blade. Then we can add our hip shape, and we want the hips angled towards us just a little bit, so our character's kind of sitting, aimed away from us, but then she's twisting so she can turn to see us. So we want to angle our hips towards us just a little bit like this. Then we can connect the stomach and lower back to the ribs and the hips like so. And then we'll readjust our center line like I did here, kind of bringing it out a little bit and giving it a more exaggerated bend. Then we can add our chest and our glutes. And again, since our character is sitting down, the glutes are going to be a little bit flatter at the bottom, and the main mass of them is going to be kind of pushing out away from the character, since all that mass has to go somewhere. So it's going to spill out and over, giving her a thicker looking bottom, even though if your character was standing up and then they sit down, the glutes don't magically get bigger. It's just all of that has to go somewhere. So this is what that would look like. Then add our simple head and collarbone like this. Now add the legs on our character and a simple bench or seat for her to be sitting on. Then we'll just have her arm coming in like this, just kind of going between her leg. And there you go. Just make any little adjustments you need, and then go ahead and finish with some line art. Next, we want to draw our character in a relaxing position. So draw a simple head, kind of tilted off to the side, and keep it in the top left corner of our page like so. Next, draw a simple torso like this and have it angled away from our character ever so slightly. Now we really want to exaggerate the angle of the hips so we can have a nice sort of hinge here in between them. That's just because obviously she's resting on the floor, so since her hip is getting pushed on by the floor, whereas her torso is kind of being supported up by her arms, you're going to have a really exaggerated bend in between them. Next, map out our arms and legs. I have just a little bit of the knee poking in for the leg laying on the ground. It'd be her left arm is not really supporting any weight. It's just kind of being held out a little bit. Whereas her right arm, which is supporting her weight, is going to be tucked up underneath the chest. So you don't really need to map out where the wrist and hand will be. So just draw these shapes and you should be good to go. Now we can go ahead and finish off the arms and legs like this. And keep in mind that arm on the right is going to get tucked underneath the chest, so we don't even need to bother drawing the hand for it. Next, go ahead and add in the neck as well as the midsection of our character, keeping that super cinched, sharp angle in between them on the top portion where there's a severe bend going on. Whereas on the bottom, we want it to be a lot more stretched out. Okay, so everything on the top area here for the midsection, nice sort of sharp V angle where it's really getting squeezed together. Whereas everything on the lower section here on the floor is actually getting stretched rather than really squeezed. Add bobs. Make any of your needed adjustments, and then you should be able to finish your character like so. And again, just notice we have a super exaggerated sort of pinch here at the top area for our midsection. You could add in like a little fat roll above the hips like I had in the construction lines, but I decided I'd just go ahead and really exaggerate the bend there just to show you. So I have a very extreme bend there at the top, and then a nice stretched stomach here at the base. Next, we'll have our character laying down on her stomach, sort of facing us. So draw a simple head like this, kind of in the center of our page. She will be supporting her torso with her arms, so we don't want her chest just kind of flat down against the ground. So we'll angle it up a little bit. Just kind of draw this shape. There'll still be the perspective here of that sort of diamond shape that the traps and collarbones make. So draw that in, but then elongate the front of that rib cage section, just because again, she's kind of holding her torso up a little bit. So we still want to be able to see some of that. Then basically draw this super weird shape to show where her hips are and the sort of in-between sections, the lower back and the stomach that connect them. We're going to change this as we go, but for now it's just a placeholder. So just kind of draw an oval shape for the hips and then have just a little connection point for the stomach and the lower back. Then we want to draw our glutes hanging off of the hip structure here and keep them nice and high, because from this angle the arc of her back and everything will be very noticeable. So we still want to keep the glutes nice and high. So even though they're kind of back behind her and they're a little bit further from us than her head and her chest, we still want to have a peaked glute. Then go ahead and add her arms in to support her weight like so. Then we can draw her thigh as well as throw in a little foot there for the freaks. Draw the bubbas. And there you go. After you make any little changes you need, little readjustments and balances, you can go ahead and finish the character. Next, we'll go ahead and draw a character who is standing up and stretching. So to start, we just want to add a simple head, kind of looking off towards the right portion of our page, like so. To account for the perspective on her arm, her hand is going to be a little bit further from us than her elbow. So go ahead and make sure her hand is a bit smaller than typical, so you can really taper the forearm off into the small wrist. Now we can add our ribs and have our center line kind of come off from the top here at the upper portion of the ribs, and then it starts bending off towards us at the bottom. And this is because she's essentially, you know, she's stretching, but she's essentially cracking her back. So we're just twisting her torso off away from us, but her hips will be more so facing towards us. Then we can draw a simple hip shape like this. We can connect them, and for this character, since we have her stretching, I figured I'd keep her a little bit more athletic, so she'll be a little bit thinner than some of our other characters. So go ahead and give her a pretty tight hourglass figure. But on the front for her stomach, we want to keep this to be kind of just a gradual stretched out shape. Whereas this back portion, because she's curvy and she's even, you know, twisting around and stuff, we're going to have a pretty exaggerated arc for her back, and then stretch out the stomach and keep it a little bit more gradual. Then just throw in our thighs like so. Then we can draw the smaller chest here tucked underneath of this arm, and then throw in this second arm that's kind of supporting the elbow of the first arm we drew. kind of show that she's kind of pulling on that arm to help stretch and twist. Make any little corrections you need to, and then you can go over and draw in your hard lines. So again, I kept this character kind of skinny. She's a little bit more of an athletic character, but you can kind of thicken her up and do whatever you want if you have a thicker character that you're trying to draw. But for now, if you follow along with the tutorial, it should look something like this when you are finished. Now we'll take a look at a character who is running towards us. So go ahead and draw a simple head like this, kind of keeping it pretty symmetrical because she's pretty much facing us, so you don't need to have weird angles going on. Just keep a nice symmetrical, simple head looking right at us. Next, we can add a simple chest structure like so, keeping it kind of shallow there at the bottom just because, you know, she's going to have a very, very slight lean forward to her since she's in an athletic position running here. But it won't be so extreme that the traps and collarbone are making like a crazy diamond shape. We just basically want to cut off the bottom of our rib just to show that there's a little bit of leaning going on. Then we want to stack our hip shape just behind the ribs like so. Connect the stomach with a nice hourglass figure, and then go ahead and draw in the legs. We want the leg coming towards us to have a nice thick kneecap just to show that obviously that leg is a lot closer to us. We still want to have that thigh kind of tapering off towards the knee, but it'll be very, very, very gradual since the knee is coming towards us. So draw a big knee, have a really small taper going to it, and you should be good to go. And just kind of tuck that other thigh in behind the knee. Then we can add our arms kind of swinging around, helping build momentum. Add in the neck, the traps, and I gave this character a small chest because, again, she's a little bit more athletic running around, so figured I would give her a more moderate build. Make any little adjustments and balancing changes you need to make sure she's balanced and is looking good, and then you can go ahead, trace over your lines, and you should have a finished character like this. Now we will finish the tutorial with a more challenging position, which will be a character doing the splits. We'll start with having a completely straight up and down center line just because our character is going to be looking straight at us. So we want to have a perfectly straight line so that we can properly get our character nice and symmetrical off of each side. Then just draw a simple head like so. Add in a nice oval shape for our chest area and include the collarbones kind of angled off behind her just because when she's doing the splits like this, she's going to have to support herself with her arms. So she is leaning forward slightly, but she's not bent over. So we want to have a little bit of that showing. So a little diamond shape with the traps and the collarbones, but nothing too extreme. Then we want to add our hips, keeping them relatively straight up and down. Obviously, because her whole body's kind of leaned forward, we do want them to have just a little bit of an angle to them. So just keep the bottom area a little bit more shallow than what we would typically draw, and it should get that look. Then we can just map out our shoulder joints as well as the little joints for our legs. Add in a stomach. We don't want her to have like so we still want her to have an hourglass shape, but we can kind of keep everything a little bit more rounded because since she's kind of scrunched up, lean forward a little bit, the softness of the belly will show through. So you don't want to keep it just super tight and super angular because she's not standing, she's not stretched, she's kind of hunched over. So the skin and fat there is going to kind of fold over itself. So give her a nice sort of rounded midsection, but it's still pinching into an hourglass. Then we can draw a pair of arms and hands to give our character the support she needs so she doesn't fall forward. Then draw her chest, and for these ones, remember her arms are kind of pinching them together, so we kind of want to warp the shape of our boob around the arms like so. Then we just want to angle the main portion of our leg down underneath that horizontal line. Our character, when she's doing the splits like this and lean forward, she's not going to have perfectly sort of parallel legs to the base of our page. They're just going to be coming towards us ever so slightly. So she's still doing the splits, but it's not going to be just absolutely straight off to the side. Then we can add our thighs getting nice and stretched, and they're holding off to the sides like so. Now remember, the glutes, they have to go somewhere. because they're supported by the ground, but then they're also getting pinched together because of the angle of the leg. They're actually going to be really high and tight. So what that means is the glute itself, the cheek, is going to be visible over our hips. So draw in the little bumps for your glutes like so. Then after you make sure your character is nice and symmetrical and balanced, you can go ahead and finish with the line art. Obviously, there's a lot more poses out there, as well as ways that we can still draw a nice portrait while showing the full body. However, for this first posing tutorial, I want to keep it more in just a simple portrait form, since it's more commonly used in fan arts, and overall a little bit easier to draw for beginners. So feel free to draw along with this video and map out your character on top of it. And keep an eye open for some later videos where we will go over more advanced poses, as well as ways to have a full body pose while still keeping your character as the main focus of the portrait. Now, like and subscribe to learn how to draw the waifu of your dreams.